They tore my daughter from my arms, and the echo of her screams still burns through my bones. Everyone said it was for the best, but nothing about it felt right. I used to think love could survive anything, that a mother's heart, once cracked open, could be glued back together with time, prayers, and promises. But the day they took Lily away, I learned that love could bleed quietly, day after day, and no one would notice except the one who's dying inside. My name is Sarah Lawson. I'm 52, born in Tennessee, and I'm the woman the system forgot. It began on a rain-slick Tuesday morning. The social worker arrived wearing a pale blue coat that smelled like disinfectant and judgment. Behind her were 2 police officers and a woman holding a clipboard. My little girl, Lily, was standing in her pajamas, her hair tangled like a halo gone wrong, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Daisy. She didn't understand what was happening. I didn't either, not really. They said words like temporary custody, stability, and child welfare, but all I heard was the sound of my heartbeat splintering. My ex-husband, David, stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes cold. He didn't say a word. For years, he'd made me feel small, unstable, too emotional to be trusted. He was the calm one, the reasonable one, the one people believed. But behind closed doors, calm was cruelty disguised as control. The bruises he left weren't always visible, but they never healed. When they walked out with Lily that day, I followed them barefoot into the driveway. I begged, I screamed. I promised I'd do better, be better. But they didn't look back. And my little girl, my entire reason for breathing, pressed her tiny hand against the window as the car pulled away. Her face blurred by the glass and the rain, her lips forming one word I couldn't hear but knew by heart. Mama. The house fell silent after that. It was a silence so heavy it had weight, pressing on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. I spent hours sitting on the edge of her bed, the sheets still warm from her body, the smell of her shampoo still clinging to the pillow. I'd pick up her little shoes and trace the outline of her footprints on the carpet, afraid that one day even that would fade. Everyone had an opinion. My sister said it was God's way of forcing me to heal. My pastor said I needed forgiveness, though he never clarified from whom. The neighbors whispered. They always do, but none of them saw what I saw. None of them felt the hollow ache that came with folding a child's clothes you're not allowed to watch her wear. I started keeping a notebook. I filled it with letters I'd never send. Letters to Lily about her favorite bedtime story, the one about the firefly who got lost but always found her way home. I wrote about her giggle that could break through any storm cloud. About how she once said that angels sleep on clouds made of marshmallows. I wrote until my hands cramped, until the ink bled through the paper, until the pain had somewhere to go other than my chest. 3 months later, I received the first court notice. David had filed for full custody, claiming I was unfit due to emotional instability. My therapist tried to reassure me that truth would come out, but truth moves slower than lies, and lies always travel in luxury cars. David had money, a new girlfriend with perfect hair and perfect alibis, and a way of turning every conversation into a performance. I had the truth, and trembling hands. The hearing was set for April. I remember the morning vividly. The air smelled like dust and cold coffee. My lawyer, a young man named Ethan, who couldn't have been older than my oldest niece, told me to stay calm, stay composed. He said emotion might make me look unpredictable. But how do you stay calm when the system is about to decide whether you're allowed to be a mother? David's lawyer painted a picture of me that I barely recognized: unstable, depressed, neglectful. He even mentioned the time I forgot Lily's lunchbox on the counter once after working an overnight shift at the hospital. They twisted every act of exhaustion into a weapon, every tear into a flaw. When it was my turn to speak, my throat locked. My hands trembled around the Bible they made me swear on. I told them I loved my daughter more than my own heartbeat. That I'd do anything, therapy, classes, supervision, anything just to hold her again. But the judge's eyes were tired. His voice was soft, almost rehearsed, when he said, "For now, custody remains with the father. Mrs. Lawson, you may have supervised visitation every other weekend. Supervised. The word sliced through me. To have to earn the right to love your own child under someone else's watch felt like being buried alive. The first time I saw Lily again, it was in a small room with yellow walls and a camera in the corner. She had grown taller. Her hair was cut short. She didn't run to me like she used to. She looked at me with confusion, like I was a story someone told her once, but she couldn't quite remember. I forced a smile, my hands shaking as I offered her a cookie. "It's your favorite," I whispered. She took it but didn't eat. "Daddy says you're sick," she said softly. My world tilted. I wanted to scream, to tear through the lies David had built around her heart. But I couldn't, not there. Not under that camera. So I smiled through the shattering. "I'm getting better, sweetheart," I said. "I'm getting better just for you." That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked older, harder, unfamiliar. I realized that if I didn't fight differently, I'd lose her forever. So I began rebuilding my health, my home, my faith. I found a support group for mothers like me, women labeled unstable, unfit, unworthy, women who had fought battles no one wrote about. We shared stories, tears, and survival tips. One woman told me, "They can take your child from your arms, but not from your prayers." And she was right. From that day on, I made a promise. I would not let the system or the lies define me. I would not let David rewrite our story. I would fight, not with anger, but with endurance, with grace sharpened into steel. Because a mother's love is not a weakness. It's a weapon carved by tears and faith, and I wasn't done fighting yet. I didn't know where to start, but I knew that staying still meant losing her forever. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's confused stare, the way she hesitated before calling me Mom. That single pause haunted me more than the court ruling, more than the whispers from neighbors or the sleepless nights replaying what-ifs in my mind. I had become a stranger in my own daughter's story, and that was a wound I refused to let fester. The next morning, I drove to the church on Maple Street. The air inside smelled of old wood and candle wax, the kind of scent that carried both peace and pain. Pastor Raymond had known me since my wedding day. When I walked in, his eyes softened with that mixture of pity and concern I'd grown used to. I didn't want his pity, but I needed a plan. "Pastor," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm losing her." He gestured for me to sit. "Sarah," he said gently, "you can't fight fire with fire. You have to rebuild your foundation before you fight again." I wanted to shout that I had no time for foundations, that my daughter was being fed lies every day she spent with her father, but instead I nodded and let the silence settle. He prayed for me, and as his words floated upward, something small and stubborn inside me began to breathe again. I joined a parenting course that week, then therapy twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Miller, was a kind woman with a quiet voice and eyes that saw too much. She asked me to talk about the night David first hit me. I didn't want to, but I did. For the first time, I said it out loud without flinching. The sound of those words breaking the air felt like cracking a lock I'd been trapped behind for years. Dr. Miller told me healing wasn't linear. It was a series of small victories stitched together by courage. I didn't feel brave, but I kept showing up. 2 months later, I was stronger, though still aching. My visits with Lily were steady but distant. She would draw pictures of her new family, her dad, his girlfriend, and a baby they were expecting. I would praise her drawings, smile, and cry in the car afterward. Each time, I reminded myself, consistency is love in action. Then came the turning point. One Sunday after service, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a photo, Lily sitting on a stranger's lap wearing a dress I'd never seen. The woman in the photo wasn't David's girlfriend. My heart stopped. There was no note, but the back of the picture had a faint watermark from a studio downtown. I drove there the next day, my pulse pounding like a drum. The photographer, a young man with ink-stained hands, looked startled when I showed him the photo. "Oh yeah," he said slowly. "That's from a shoot about a month ago. Some lady said she was her aunt. Paid in cash. My skin went cold. David had no sisters. Do you remember what she looked like? I asked. He hesitated. Mid-30s. Dark hair, green scarf. Nervous. He checked his logbook and frowned. Weird thing. She used your last name. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Someone was using my name, pretending to be family. My stomach churned as I realized what it meant. Someone was trying to erase me, not just in court, but in Lily's life too. I called my lawyer immediately, my voice trembling as I explained everything. Ethan listened carefully, then said, "Sarah, this could be crucial. If we can prove manipulation or coercion, it could open the case again." His words were the first sliver of light I'd heard in months. That night, I sat in front of Lily's old toy chest, tracing the edge of her favorite storybook, the one about the firefly. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm coming, baby. Mama's not giving up." Over the next few weeks, I gathered evidence. Every text David had sent, every email he'd written where he questioned my sanity. Ethan filed a motion for reconsideration, citing parental alienation and misrepresentation. It sounded clinical, but what it really meant was this: someone had been feeding my daughter poison in the shape of love. The hearing was set for July. I didn't sleep the night before. I paced my kitchen, praying for strength. I looked at the photo again and again, focusing on Lily's eyes, the same blue as mine, but dimmer now, clouded with confusion. She needs to see me fight, I told myself. Even if I lose again, she needs to see I never stopped fighting. When I walked into the courthouse that morning, the air felt different. David looked confident, his lawyer smug. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. I stood tall, wearing a navy dress that matched my resolve. Ethan whispered, "You've got this, Sarah." The judge reviewed the new evidence quietly, his eyes moving between documents and David's shifting expression. When Ethan presented the photo, the courtroom held its breath. "Your Honor," he said, "the woman in this picture is not my client, yet she identified herself using my client's name while in the company of the child. We believe this was an attempt to manipulate the child's understanding of who her mother is." David's lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a look. He asked David directly, "Mr. Lawson, do you know who this woman is?" David hesitated, his calm facade cracking for the first time. She's a friend," he stammered. "She was just helping out." "Helping out by impersonating the child's mother?" The judge pressed. The courtroom buzzed. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but with hope. For the first time in over a year, truth had entered the room. The judge ordered an investigation and temporarily reinstated my unsupervised visitation rights until the matter was resolved. When I heard those words, I couldn't stop the tears. They weren't of victory, but of relief. A small, fragile kind that you barely let yourself feel in case it disappears. That weekend, when I saw Lily again, it was at a park near our old neighborhood. She ran toward me this time, her arms open, Daisy the stuffed rabbit bouncing in her hand. She smelled like sunshine and strawberries. I held her so tightly I thought my heart would burst. "Daddy said you're coming back," she whispered. "Yes," I breathed into her hair. "I'm coming back for good." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. People like David don't lose quietly. They plot in silence, waiting for the next move. I could see it in his eyes even as he watched us from across the field, smiling that thin, dangerous smile. Still, for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt alive. The system might have tried to break me, but they forgot one thing. A mother's love doesn't fade. It fights, it rebuilds, and when the time comes, it rises from the ashes with fire in her veins, and I was ready to burn down every lie that ever stood between me and my child. The following weeks felt like walking a tightrope above an open flame. Every visit with Lily was precious, yet every goodbye tore a piece of me apart. I was allowed to see her freely now, but it felt fragile, temporary, like the slightest wind could take it all away again. I lived each day with my phone glued to my hand, terrified that one call from the court could send everything crashing down. Still, I tried to give Lily the kind of days that could fill her heart again. We baked cookies on Saturdays, even when half the dough ended up stuck in her hair. We visited the animal shelter, and she fell in love with a tiny gray kitten she named Smokey. I saw her laughter return little by little, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. Sometimes she'd say things that pierced me quietly, like, "Daddy says you're better now," or "Miss Rachel says she's not mad at you anymore." I never corrected her. I just smiled and said, "That's good, baby. I'm happy everyone's happy." But late at night, when the house went still, the fear would come back. What if the judge changed his mind? What if David found another way to twist things? The investigation was still ongoing, and though the evidence leaned in my favor, people like David had a way of turning the truth into fog. I'd seen it too many times before. Ethan called one Thursday morning, his tone cautious. "Sarah, we've got the report from Child Services. The impersonation incident worked in our favor, but David's lawyer is pushing for a psychological reevaluation. They're arguing that your emotional history makes you unstable under stress." I closed my eyes, the familiar ache rising. "They're going to dig up everything, aren't they?" "Yes," he said softly. "Every record, every note from therapy. But we'll be ready this time." After we hung up, I sat on the porch steps, clutching my mug so tight the ceramic creaked. The morning sun touched my face, but I felt cold inside. Healing had never meant forgetting, and I realized that surviving David's abuse had left scars that still whispered lies to me when I was tired. But I couldn't let those whispers define me anymore. That night, I prayed harder than I had in years. "God, I don't need a miracle," I whispered. "I just need strength to stand when the storm hits again." The next session with Dr. Miller was heavier than usual. I told her about the new hearing, about my fear that no matter what I did, I'd always be the broken one in their eyes. She looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Sarah, you've spent your whole life apologizing for surviving. Maybe it's time to stop saying sorry for not dying in someone else's fire." Her words hit like thunder. For the first time, I didn't cry in her office. I just breathed, deep and steady, like someone who'd finally realized she didn't need permission to exist. The day of the reevaluation came too soon. The psychologist they assigned was a man named Dr. Whitaker, cold, clinical, the kind who spoke in observations rather than compassion. His questions were sharp, precise, designed to find cracks. "Do you still experience anger toward your ex-husband? Have you ever felt unsafe being alone? Do you think your daughter is better off with you or with her father?" Each question was a trap, and I could feel his pen scratching judgments with every answer I gave. I kept my voice calm, steady. "I don't hate David," I said. "I hate what he did. But hate doesn't raise a child. Love does." He looked up for a moment, as if he wasn't expecting that. When I left the building, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people pass by, their lives untouched by mine. For years, I'd envied people with ordinary problems. Late bills, spilled coffee, tired smiles. I used to have those problems too. Then life shifted, and I learned that sometimes survival meant learning to breathe underwater while pretending you're fine. A week later, the report came in. Ethan called me, excitement coloring his usually calm tone. "Sarah, the evaluation went well. Dr. Whitaker concluded that you show remarkable emotional resilience and self-awareness. He's recommending shared custody until a final ruling." My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, tears spilling before I could even speak. It wasn't full custody, not yet, but it was hope. Tangible, solid hope. That weekend, Lily came home for the first time in nearly 2 years. When she walked into the house, she looked around like she was stepping into a dream she half remembered. I'd cleaned every corner, baked her favorite cookies, even hung up her old drawings on the fridge. She touched them carefully, her small fingers tracing the faded crayon lines. "You kept them," she whispered. "Of course," I said softly. "They're masterpieces." That night, after she fell asleep in her old bed, I stood by the doorway watching her. The moonlight brushed her face, and for the first time in years I felt peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from simply surviving long enough to see light again. But peace doesn't last when you're living in a war built on manipulation. 2 days later, I got an email from Ethan marked urgent. "Sarah, David's filed a countermotion. He's claiming you violated court orders by discussing the case with Lily. He submitted an audio clip." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I said. "I've never talked about the case in front of her." Ethan sighed. "The clip's heavily edited. He's trying to frame a conversation out of context." I felt dizzy. My fingers shook as I typed back, "What happens now?" "We'll challenge it," he replied quickly. "But be prepared. It's going to get ugly again." That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rhythm of Lily's breathing down the hall. I wanted to protect her from everything, but I knew the war wasn't over. People like David didn't want custody. They wanted control. The next morning, I found Lily sitting on the porch, hugging Daisy the rabbit. "Mom," she said quietly, "Daddy called last night. He said you're mad at him again." I knelt down beside her, keeping my voice calm. "Sweetheart, adults say things when they're upset, but you don't have to believe everything you hear, okay?" She nodded slowly, her eyes too old for her age. "I just want everyone to stop fighting." "I know, baby," I said, brushing her hair back. "Me too." After she went back inside, I sat there for a long time, staring at the horizon. I realized something then. This wasn't just about custody. It was about identity, about reclaiming the truth of who I was before fear turned me into a ghost. I stood up, walked inside, and pulled out my old notebook. On the first blank page, I wrote, "This is not the story of a broken woman. This is the story of a mother who refused to disappear." I didn't know what the next hearing would bring. Maybe more lies, maybe more heartbreak. But I knew this much. Every time they tried to silence me, I would speak louder. Every time they tried to erase me, I would write myself back into existence. Because I wasn't fighting just for Lily anymore. I was fighting for every mother who'd been told she was too emotional, too fragile, too much. And this time, I wasn't going to break. The night before the final hearing, the air in my small apartment felt heavy, almost suffocating. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint like they were scars from every moment life had broken me. My attorney, Rachel, had called earlier that day, reminding me to stay calm in court, to let the evidence speak for itself. But she didn't know that my mind wasn't calm. It was a storm. Every heartbeat carried the weight of what I'd lost, the smell of my daughter's hair, the warmth of her hand clutching mine, the sound of her laughter filling the room like sunlight breaking through a winter morning. I had prayed for this day, begged God for justice, but now that it was coming, all I felt was fear. Not fear of losing again, but fear that I wasn't strong enough to face it. When morning came, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress that once made my husband, Mark, say I looked steadfast. I needed that word today. As I walked into the courthouse, I felt the cold marble beneath my heels like the pulse of destiny. Rachel met me at the entrance, her eyes kind but focused. "He'll be there," she said softly. I nodded. I knew. Mark would come with his lawyer, his charm, and his well-rehearsed remorse. But what scared me more was seeing my daughter, Lily. Would she run to me? Would she hesitate? Would she remember how much I loved her? When we entered the courtroom, everything went quiet. The judge sat high, expression unreadable, and on the left side, Mark was already seated. He looked older, his hair grayer, his posture tighter, but his eyes still carried that same mixture of guilt and pride that had always confused me. Lily sat beside him, holding her grandmother's hand. My heart clenched at the sight of her. Her curls were tied neatly, her dress white with little blue flowers, just like the one I used to sew for her birthdays. For a brief second, her eyes met mine, and the world stopped moving. The first part of the hearing focused on the reports. Rachel stood tall, reading the findings from child services and the therapist. "Mrs. Daniels," she began, "has shown consistent progress in her emotional health. She has attended weekly therapy, maintained stable employment, and established a nurturing environment suitable for her daughter's well-being. Meanwhile, Mr. Daniels has cooperated with visitation guidelines, but has been cautioned regarding emotional manipulation during visits. Mark's attorney objected immediately. That's an exaggeration. Mr. Daniels is a loving father who has ensured stability while Mrs. Daniels— Rachel cut in, voice steady but firm. While Mrs. Daniels rebuilt her life from the ashes he left behind. The tension cracked through the room like lightning. The judge raised a hand, signaling for calm. Then came the most excruciating part, the therapist's testimony. Dr. Walsh, a woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, took the stand. "I've been seeing Lily for 8 months," she said. "She's bright, sensitive, deeply empathetic. But she carries anxiety, primarily triggered by conflict between her parents. She fears being the reason for anyone's pain." I bit my lip hard, fighting the tears burning in my eyes. Dr. Walsh continued, "Lily has repeatedly expressed her love for both parents, but when she talks about her mother, she often uses the phrase safe place. When she talks about her father, she says fun but scary. That contrast is significant." I saw Mark shift in his seat, his jaw tightening. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. He just stared ahead, his hands gripping the table like he was holding on to the last thread of control. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled at first. "Your Honor," I began, "I know I've made mistakes. I wasn't perfect. I let my pain consume me when my marriage fell apart. I let fear silence me when I should have fought sooner. But everything I've done since then has been for one reason: to be the kind of mother my daughter deserves." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. Lily doesn't need a perfect mother. She needs one who listens, who forgives, who keeps her heart safe even when the world outside is loud and cruel. And that's who I am now. The courtroom was silent. Even Mark's lawyer didn't move. The judge nodded slowly, writing something down. Then Mark stood up, asking to speak. His lawyer hesitated but didn't stop him. "Your Honor," he said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "She's right. I failed her. I failed them both. But I love my daughter, and I don't want her to think love is something you fight over. I just want to be part of her life, even if I'm not the one she runs to first." It was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in years, and it broke me. Because deep down, I knew he meant it. The judge called for a recess, and the room emptied slowly. Outside the courtroom, I found myself standing near the hallway window, staring at the rain starting to fall. Lily came walking toward me, holding her grandmother's hand. My breath caught. "Mom?" she whispered. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, but it carried everything I had prayed to hear again. I knelt down, my arms trembling, and she stepped closer. "Do you still have the sunflower necklace?" she asked. I nodded, touching it around my neck. "Always." She smiled, a shy, beautiful smile that made my heart feel like it was healing in real time. "Then I know you didn't forget me," she said. I couldn't speak. I just pulled her into my arms, feeling her heartbeat against mine, steady and real. The world around us faded. When the recess ended, the judge reconvened and began reading his decision. Every second felt like a lifetime. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the words, until he finally said, "Custody will be reinstated to Mrs. Daniels, with joint visitation rights granted to Mr. Daniels under the supervision of Family Services." I couldn't breathe. I looked at Lily, then at Mark. He nodded once quietly. For the first time in years, there was no battle left in his eyes, only surrender. When we walked out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and new beginnings. Lily reached for my hand, and when her fingers wrapped around mine, it felt like redemption itself. I looked up at the sky, whispering a prayer that wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was just gratitude. Because sometimes God doesn't fix what's broken by erasing the cracks. He makes the light shine through them instead. The days that followed the court's decision felt surreal. Every morning I woke up expecting to feel the old ache, the weight of loss pressing against my chest. but instead, I felt something I hadn't known in years: peace. Not loud, not triumphant, just quiet and steady like sunlight through the blinds. Lily was home. Her laughter returned to the walls of our small apartment like a melody I'd been holding my breath waiting to hear. She filled the rooms with her drawings, her stuffed animals, and her tiny chaos, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind the mess. Because every toy on the floor was proof that she was here, that she was safe, that I had been given a second chance. But peace, I learned, doesn't come without ghosts. Some nights I still woke up in a cold sweat, hearing echoes of the courtroom, Mark's voice cracking, the word failed hanging in the air. I knew he loved her. That truth didn't vanish with the judge's decision. I could see it in the way he looked at her during supervised visits, how his smile always faltered at the end when he had to say goodbye. Forgiveness had always been something I thought I couldn't give him, but now I realized it was something I needed for myself too. Lily and I began building new rhythms together. Every morning we made pancakes shaped like hearts, though most of them came out looking like clouds or potatoes, and every night before bed we read the same book, The Secret Garden. She loved the part where Mary finds the locked gate, whispering, "Mom, that's like us. We found our gate again." And I would smile, knowing she understood more than I thought she could. Children always do. One afternoon, as I picked her up from school, I saw Mark waiting by the gate. It wasn't his day for visitation. My first instinct was to turn around, to protect the fragile calm we had. But Lily spotted him before I could move. "Daddy!" she called, running toward him. My heart tightened, but I stayed still, watching. Mark crouched down, catching her in his arms. He looked up at me over her shoulder, hesitant, almost asking for permission. I nodded slightly. When Lily finally ran back to me, holding a folded piece of paper, she said, "Daddy made this for you." Inside was a drawing, just stick figures, but I recognized us immediately. A man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands under a sky full of stars. At the bottom he had written, "For what once was broken, may it now grow strong." My eyes stung. I folded the paper carefully, tucking it into my purse. That night I placed it on my bedside table, right beside the sunflower necklace, as a quiet reminder that some wounds don't need to disappear to be healed. They just need to stop bleeding. Weeks turned into months, and life began to feel like a series of small miracles. Lily started sleeping through the night again, without nightmares. She laughed more, danced in the kitchen, and even asked if we could visit her dad at the park on weekends. It wasn't easy, but I agreed. Watching them play frisbee together, I realized that my love for Lily had grown beyond just protecting her. It now included teaching her that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a bridge. But then, one late evening, Rachel called me. Her tone was serious. "There's something you should know," she said. "Mark's company is relocating him to another state. He filed a motion requesting modification of visitation." My stomach dropped. "He wants to take her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Not full custody," Rachel clarified, "but extended summer visits, 8 weeks instead of 2. 8 weeks. The thought of not seeing Lily for that long hit me like a wave. I sat there in silence, the room spinning slowly. When I told Lily, she went quiet. "That's a long time, Mom," she whispered. I forced a smile. "It is. But your dad wants to spend time with you too, sweetheart." She looked down, tracing circles on the table. "Will you miss me?" I cupped her face in my hands. "More than you can imagine," I said. "But you'll come back, and I'll be right here waiting." The weeks before summer were heavy with unspoken emotions. Every bedtime story, every walk to school felt sacred, like I was storing memories in jars for the months ahead. On the morning she left, we stood by the train station. The platform smelled of metal and rain. Mark arrived, suitcase in hand, and for once there was no tension between us. Just two parents, both a little broken, trying to do right by the same child. As the train whistle blew, Lily hugged me so tightly it hurt. "Don't forget to water the sunflowers," she said. I smiled through my tears. "I promise." I watched her climb aboard, waving through the window until the train disappeared into the distance. That night, the apartment felt unbearably quiet again. I sat by the window, holding her favorite stuffed bunny, the one missing an ear, and whispered, "God, keep her safe." The city lights flickered outside, and I realized something important. Love isn't measured by how close we stay to someone, but by how much of our heart we're willing to let go so they can grow. Weeks passed. Letters came, handwritten notes from Lily describing summer adventures with her dad. She wrote about fishing, roasting marshmallows, and how he taught her to ride a bike without training wheels. Each word was filled with joy, and though part of me ached with longing, another part swelled with pride. She was happy. She was loved. That was enough. Then one afternoon, a package arrived. Inside was a small frame with a photo of Lily holding 2 sunflowers. On the back, she had written in her uneven handwriting, "For Mom, who taught me that love can grow anywhere." I pressed the photo against my chest, tears spilling freely. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? Love doesn't stay trapped in courtrooms or tied to pain. It grows wild, like sunflowers after a storm. Later that night, I received an unexpected message from Mark. It was short. "Thank you for letting her love both of us." I'm learning too. I stared at the screen, overwhelmed by something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. As I turned off the light, the moonlight fell across the framed photo, illuminating Lily's smile. I whispered into the stillness, "You're doing okay, baby." And so am I. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Because healing, I realized, isn't the end of pain. It's the beginning of peace. The summer stretched longer than I imagined, each day folding into the next like pages of a book I didn't want to read but couldn't put down. Every morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and glanced at the empty chair across the table where Lily used to sit, her legs swinging as she hummed songs from her favorite cartoons. The silence was different now, gentler but still heavy. It wasn't the silence of loss anymore. It was the silence of waiting. Waiting for her letters, waiting for her laughter to echo through the house again, waiting for my heart to catch up with my hope. One humid afternoon, I decided to start painting again. I hadn't touched a brush in years. The easel sat in the corner of my living room, dusty and forgotten, much like the woman I used to be. But when I dipped the brush into shades of gold and blue, something in me stirred awake. I painted the image that lived in my memory. The day Lily came home from court, the way sunlight touched her curls, the look of peace on her face as she held my hand. The more I painted, the more the ache turned into something beautiful. I wasn't painting to escape the pain anymore. I was painting to understand it. Rachel stopped by one evening, holding a bottle of wine and a tired smile. "You're doing better than most people would," she said, settling into the couch. I shrugged. I don't know if better is the word. Some days I still wake up expecting to hear her call my name. Rachel looked at the painting leaning against the wall and nodded softly. "That's healing, you know. The missing, the painting, the forgiving, it's all part of coming home to yourself." I smiled faintly, feeling seen in a way that words rarely allowed. Then she told me something that made my heart race. Mark's company isn't doing well. There's talk he might come back earlier than planned. I froze, brush midair. "You mean Lily might come home sooner?" Rachel shrugged. "It's possible. But Emily, his mother, filed a request to take over part of the visitation if he moves." My pulse quickened. Emily, the woman who had once told me, "You'll never be enough for my son." I thought I was done fighting her. But some wounds reopen with just a whisper of their name. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories came flooding back. Her cold smile at our wedding, her judgmental eyes every time I faltered as a young mother. I remembered the day I left, how she'd stood by the door holding Lily saying, "You're not fit for motherhood." I'd carried those words like stones in my heart for years. And now she wanted to take away the little piece I'd rebuilt. I stood at the window, watching the moonlight dance across the street, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." 2 days later, I received an email from Mark confirming what Rachel had said. "Mom's considering staying in town for a while," he wrote. "She wants to see more of Lily when we come back. I think she's trying to make things right." My hands trembled as I read it. I wanted to believe people could change, that time could soften sharp hearts, but part of me feared this was another storm in disguise. When Lily called that night, her voice was bright and filled with stories. "Mom, guess what? Grandma taught me how to bake cookies, but she burned the first batch." I laughed genuinely. "Sounds like you two had fun." "Yeah," she said, her tone softening. "She told me she wants to be nicer this time." That sentence lingered long after we hung up. Maybe, just maybe, forgiveness was stretching further than I thought. A week later, Mark called. "We're coming home early," he said, his voice tired. "Company downsized. I'm not sure what's next." I could hear the weight in his tone, the defeat, the uncertainty, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly. "For Lily," he sighed. "For Lily." The day they returned, I stood at the train station again, the same place where I'd watched them leave weeks ago. This time, when Lily came running off the train, her hair wild and her backpack bouncing, I dropped to my knees and caught her in my arms. "You're home," I whispered into her hair. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too, Mom," she said, her little voice muffled against my shoulder. "But guess what? I brought you something." She handed me a small folded napkin, inside of which was a dried sunflower petal. "It's from the field near Grandma's house. I wanted you to have it." I held it carefully, feeling its fragility, its meaning. Behind her, Mark appeared, carrying a suitcase and wearing exhaustion-like armor. "Hey," he said, giving me a small nod. "Hey," I replied. There was no anger, no blame, just two people standing in the wreckage of what used to be, trying to build something kinder from it. That evening, we all sat together for dinner, an awkward, fragile peace hovering between us. Lily talked endlessly, telling stories about fishing trips and bike rides, about how her dad sang off-key in the car. Mark laughed, genuinely this time, and even I couldn't help but smile. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, before everything fell apart. But there was a difference now. The silence between us wasn't dangerous anymore. It was understanding. After Lily went to bed, Mark lingered by the door. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. About how I treated you, about how we treated each other." I looked up, unsure what to say. "You don't have to—" "No," he interrupted gently. "I do. You didn't deserve the way I left things. I thought control meant love. I was wrong." His words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, unhurried, real. "I'm sorry, Anna. It was strange hearing my name like that, from him, without anger or pride. Just truth." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." When he left, I stood by the door long after it closed, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't a one-time act. It was a process, one that began the moment you decided to stop bleeding for someone who no longer held the knife. As I tucked Lily in later, she mumbled sleepily, "Mom, are you and Dad friends now?" I smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "We're learning to be." She smiled in her half-dreaming way. "That's good. Friends don't fight over love. They share it." I sat beside her until she drifted off, her breathing soft and steady. Outside, the first stars began to bloom in the sky, quiet and distant. I looked up and whispered, "Maybe this is what grace looks like." And in that moment, I knew that even though the past couldn't be erased, it no longer defined us. It only reminded us how far love was willing to go to start again. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and forgiving, wrapping the apartment in warmth that felt like a quiet promise. I woke before Lily did and stood by her doorway, watching her sleep. Her hand was curled around her stuffed bunny, her lips slightly parted, breathing the kind of peace I had once believed we'd never know again. I thought about how far we'd come, The courtroom, the tears, the heartbreak, and how somehow we were still here. Still standing. Still whole. I whispered a small prayer, not for victory this time, but for steadiness. Because love, I had learned, wasn't about grand moments. It was about staying. Later that day, Mark stopped by to return a few of Lily's things she'd left at his place. He looked different, tired, but softer. His pride had melted into something human. When I opened the door, he gave a hesitant smile. "She left her sketchbook," he said, handing it to me. "She's been drawing sunflowers again." I smiled faintly. "She says they remind her that love keeps growing even when the weather changes." He nodded, eyes glancing around the room. "She gets that from you." His words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to compliments from him, especially the kind that carried sincerity instead of guilt. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us thick with everything we hadn't said. Finally, he exhaled. "I've been offered a job back in the city. Less money, but it means I can stay close to her. I don't want to be a weekend father anymore." I studied his face, searching for the man I once knew. There was something different now, a humility that didn't used to exist. "That's good, Mark," I said softly. "She needs you, but she also needs consistency." He nodded. "I know. I'm not here to take her away again. I just want to be part of her world in a way that doesn't break it this time." His honesty disarmed me. Maybe we had both been too proud, too hurt to see each other's pain before. Now standing there, we weren't enemies anymore. We were simply two flawed people who loved the same little girl more than we hated our past. "We can figure it out," I said finally. "Together." For the first time, he smiled with genuine relief. "Thank you, Anna." Over the next few weeks, we began a fragile kind of teamwork. Every Friday, Mark picked Lily up from school, and they spent the evening at the park before he dropped her off at my place. Sometimes he stayed for dinner, and Lily would make us play silly games or watch old cartoons. I'd catch glimpses of laughter I thought I'd forgotten existed. And though we were far from being a family again, we were learning how to coexist without bleeding from old wounds. But life has a way of testing peace. One Sunday afternoon, as I was preparing lunch, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, my breath caught. Emily stood there, Mark's mother. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her pearl earrings gleaming, and her expression unreadable. I froze for a moment, every old memory rushing back, the disapproval, the judgment, the words that once broke me. "Hello, Anna," she said, her voice low. "May I come in?" Part of me wanted to say no, but another part, the one that had learned forgiveness the hard way, stepped aside. "Of course," I said, my voice steady though my heart raced. She walked in, her gaze sweeping over the apartment. "It's cozy," she said after a pause. "You've made a home." I nodded cautiously. "Lily's at the park with Mark," she smiled faintly. "She told me she loves it here." We sat across from each other, the silence stretching until she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," she began. "For the things I said, for the way I treated you. I thought I was protecting my son, but all I did was help destroy something good." Her voice cracked, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Regret. Real, unpolished regret. I didn't know how to respond. For years I had dreamed of this moment, rehearsed what I would say if it ever came, but now that it was here, words felt too small. "You hurt me," I said quietly. "More than you realize. You made me doubt my worth as a mother." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I watched Lily this summer, and I saw how she talks about you, how she lights up when your name is mentioned. You gave her something I couldn't give Mark, peace." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "Why tell me this now?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I'm sick, Anna. The doctors say it's serious. I don't have much time, and I can't leave this world knowing I helped break a family instead of helping mend it." The room fell silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. I felt a wave of emotions, anger, pity, compassion, all tangled together. After a long moment, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Then let's not waste what time you have left," I said softly. She squeezed my hand, tears spilling freely now. "You're a good woman," she whispered. "Better than I ever gave you credit for." When Lily came home later, she found us sitting together on the couch, laughing through tears. "Grandma's staying for dinner," I told her. She squealed and ran to hug her. That night, as we ate together, something inside me shifted. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't just a gift for the one who hurt you. It was freedom for yourself. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a quiet presence in our lives. She joined us for Sunday dinners, told Lily stories about her childhood, and even apologized to Mark for her part in everything that went wrong. Watching them heal was like watching the final pieces of a broken puzzle fall into place. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me and asked, "Mom, do you think people can change even after they've been mean for a long time?" I smiled gently. "Yes, baby. People change when love becomes louder than their fear." She nodded thoughtfully, then whispered, "I think Grandma loves you now." I kissed her forehead. "I think she does too." Later that night, as I sat by the window painting another sunflower, I realized how much my life had transformed. The woman who once fought through courtroom battles and sleepless nights wasn't just surviving anymore. She was blooming. And this time she wasn't blooming alone. When I finished the painting, I titled it "The Season of Return." Because that's what it was, the season where everything lost had found its way home. I looked at the canvas, then at the moon outside, and whispered, "Thank you, God, for teaching me that healing doesn't come through revenge or forgetting. It comes through love that refuses to die." And in that quiet, sacred moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of completion, as if every painful chapter had been leading me right here. To peace, to grace, to the kind of love that no longer needed to be fought for because it had already won. The courtroom was filled with a thick silence that seemed to wrap around every breath, every heartbeat, every unspoken fear. I sat there, my palms pressed against my knees, trying to steady my shaking hands. Across the aisle, Michael looked hollowed out, his once confident posture replaced by a quiet despair. Beside him sat Paula, her face pale, her eyes red, clutching a tissue that was already falling apart. And in the center of it all, my daughter, sweet Monica, stood at the edge of a world too cruel for her tender age. She was the one everyone had come to see. She was the truth no one wanted to face. Judge Reynolds entered, his robe flowing behind him like the shadow of justice itself. The room rose, then sat again. He looked down from the bench with an expression that was both tired and compassionate. "We are here today to determine custody of the minor, Monica Hayes," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "I expect truth, respect, and restraint. The child will not be a weapon in this battle. She will be protected." Emily, our guardian ad litem, stood to speak first. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady, "this child has endured emotional trauma due to the conflicts between her parents. She loves them both deeply, but the environment has been toxic. I recommend we listen to Monica's wishes in a safe and supportive manner." My throat closed. I wanted to reach out and hold Monica's hand to tell her she didn't have to carry this weight. But I knew she had to speak. The truth had to come from her lips, not mine. Michael's attorney rose next, his words sharp and polished. "Your Honor, my client has made significant efforts to provide a stable home. He's attended counseling, taken parenting classes, and demonstrated his commitment to his daughter's well-being. Mrs. Hayes," he gestured toward me, "while loving, has made it difficult for Mr. Hayes to maintain consistent contact. We are asking for joint custody, with primary residence under Mr. Hayes." Every word sliced through me like a blade. I clenched my jaw to keep from crying out. My attorney leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. The truth will come." Then Emily nodded toward Monica, who sat nervously with her small hands gripping a teddy bear. "Monica, sweetheart," she said softly, "you can tell the judge how you feel. No one will be mad at you." The courtroom seemed to fade as my daughter's voice filled the air. "I love both my parents," she began, her tone fragile yet sincere. "But I get scared when they yell. I don't like when Daddy says Mommy's lying. I don't like when Mommy cries in her room. She paused, her lower lip trembling. I just want peace. I want love. I don't want to choose. But if I have to, she looked straight at the judge. I want to stay with Mommy, because with her I can sleep without being afraid. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Michael lowered his head, his shoulders shaking slightly. Paula turned away, pressing her hands to her mouth. I couldn't breathe. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't dare move. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Monica. That took great courage. He motioned to the bailiff, who gently escorted her out of the room. As the door closed, I finally exhaled. Then it was my turn. My attorney stood. Mrs. Hayes, she said, can you describe the last 6 months leading up to this hearing? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice trembling but steady enough. When the separation started, I tried to shield Monica from it. I told her that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. But Michael couldn't let go of his anger. He accused me of poisoning her mind, of turning her against him. All I ever wanted was to protect her peace. Michael's attorney stood to object, but the judge lifted his hand. Let her continue. I don't want to take Monica away from her father, I said, turning to look at Michael. I just want her to feel safe. I want her to grow up knowing she's loved, not used as a pawn. I've forgiven him more times than I can count, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward without fear. My words trembled but didn't break. For the first time, Michael met my eyes. There was pain there and regret. I could see it, the faint crack in his armor. When his turn came, Michael spoke softly, unlike the man who once shouted through walls. I made mistakes, he said. I thought control was love. I thought winning meant I was right. But all it did was destroy the family I wanted to protect. Monica's right. She deserves peace. If staying with her mother gives her that, then... I won't fight it anymore. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even his lawyer looked stunned. Tears finally spilled down my face. After months of battles, of endless hearings, of sleepless nights filled with fear and prayers, I heard the words I never expected. Surrender. Not in defeat, but in love. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. In light of the testimony and Mr. Hayes's statement, I am granting primary custody to Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Hayes will have visitation rights under supervision for the next 6 months. After that period, we will review the case for potential joint custody. The gavel came down, a sound so small, yet it shattered the weight of years. I broke down in quiet sobs, my face buried in my hands. The courtroom blurred, but through my tears, I saw Michael approach me. He didn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes wet. It wasn't an apology. It was something deeper. An acknowledgement that love, in all its brokenness, still existed. As I walked out into the crisp air, Monica ran into my arms. She was crying too, but they were tears of relief. Mommy, she whispered, does this mean we can go home? Yes, baby, I said, holding her close. We're going home, and this time, we're going to build it with peace. That night, as she slept beside me, I looked at her tiny chest rising and falling. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet hum of stillness. The storm was over, or at least, it had begun to fade. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning of learning how to love again, without fear, without blame, without war. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't winning in court. It's finding the courage to let go of what broke you and rebuild what still matters. The days after the verdict felt strangely quiet, almost hollow, as if the house itself was trying to remember what peace sounded like. Monica's laughter returned first, soft at breakfast, then louder when we walked by the river, her tiny hand clutching mine as though afraid the silence might disappear again. Every sound of her joy filled spaces once echoing with shouting. Still, in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew this wasn't over. Healing never happens in a single ruling. It happens in the slow unraveling of pain, in the tender rebuilding of trust, in the moments when forgiveness feels impossible, but you choose it anyway. A week after the trial, Michael called. The phone rang twice before I answered. His voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. "Sarah," he said softly, "I don't want to disturb you. I wanted to thank you." I stayed silent, unsure what to say. "For what?" I finally asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "For not turning Monica against me," he whispered, "for letting me still be her father, even after everything." The old version of me would have thrown his words back at him, demanded to know where that gratitude was when he accused me of manipulation. But this time I simply said, "We both made mistakes, Michael. What matters is that we stop repeating them." There was a pause, the kind of pause that used to lead to an argument. But now, it felt like both of us were standing on opposite sides of a bridge we hadn't yet rebuilt. "Can I see her this weekend?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. "But let's start slow. Maybe just lunch. Somewhere public, somewhere she feels safe." He agreed. For the first time in a long while, the conversation ended without tears, without shouting, without the bitterness that used to linger long after we hung up. That weekend, Monica met her father at a cafe by the park. I sat a few tables away, pretending to read, watching from a distance. She smiled when she saw him, cautious at first, then warm. He bent down, his eyes soft, his hands shaking as he handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a charm bracelet, the same kind she'd asked for last Christmas but never received. Her face lit up. "It's beautiful, Daddy," she said, her voice full of the pure kind of joy that children give without calculation. I felt something inside me loosen. Maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe it was exhaustion. But whatever it was, I knew it was necessary. When she came back to my table, she was still smiling. "Mommy, Daddy said he's learning how to listen now," she said proudly, as if it were the most heroic thing in the world. And maybe it was. Because in our story, listening was the one thing that could have saved us sooner. Over the next few months, things began to settle. Michael's visits became routine, and Monica no longer asked, "Will he come this time?" She simply knew he would. She started therapy sessions with Dr. Emily, where she learned how to name her feelings: fear, hope, sadness, joy, and how to understand that it's okay to have them all at once. As for me, I started journaling again. Every night after putting Monica to bed, I'd sit by the window, pen in hand, and write about everything we'd survived. Sometimes the words came like a flood, other times like broken glass. But I kept writing because it reminded me that pain has a language, and healing does too. One night, after months of silence, I received a letter. It wasn't typed, it wasn't formal, it was Michael's handwriting, shaky and uneven. "Dear Sarah, I don't expect you to ever forget what I did, but I need you to know that I remember it every day. I remember the anger, the words I threw like knives, the nights I left you crying. I thought control was love. I thought I was protecting Monica by making you small. But I was wrong. You were the strength holding us together. You always were. I've started therapy too. Not because a court told me to, but because I want to be a better man. Maybe one day we'll sit together, not as enemies, not as lovers, but as two people who did the best they could and finally learned how to forgive. Thank you for never giving up on Monica. Thank you for teaching me what love really is. Michael." I held that letter for a long time. The ink had smudged in places, like he'd written it through tears. It wasn't redemption, it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. I felt something far deeper: compassion. Weeks later, we had our first dinner together, just the three of us. It was awkward, quiet, but gentle. Monica told stories about school, about her art project, about the stray cat she wanted to adopt. Michael listened, really listened. When she spilled water, he didn't yell. He simply smiled, grabbed a napkin, and helped her clean it. Small, simple gestures, but to me, they felt like miracles. After dinner, as we stood by the door, Michael looked at me and said, "You were right. Peace isn't given. It's built, brick by brick." I nodded. And sometimes, it's built from the ruins. That night, after Monica fell asleep, I went out onto the porch. The stars were bright, scattered like tiny promises across the sky. I thought about how far we'd come. Not in distance, but in grace. There was a time I wanted revenge, wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he caused. But standing there, breathing in the cool air, I realized revenge was just another form of bondage. Forgiveness, though, it was freedom. I whispered a prayer. Not a plea, not a question, just a quiet thank you. For the lessons wrapped in heartbreak, for the strength hidden in surrender, for the love that refused to die, even when everything else did. In the end, it wasn't about winning custody. It wasn't about proving who was right. It was about becoming whole again, about showing Monica that love doesn't end when people break. It just changes, softens, humbles. And maybe that's the truest kind of love, the one that survives the storm, not by fighting harder, but by learning to stand still when the wind finally stops. As I looked at the sky that night, a shooting star crossed above the horizon. I smiled, not because I wished for something new, but because I finally understood that the life I had, the quiet, imperfect, mended one, was already enough. And that's when I realized forgiveness isn't something you give once. It's something you choose every day until it becomes part of the air you breathe. It's strange how the quiet after a storm feels louder than the storm itself. Months had passed since that day in court, and life had finally found a rhythm again, gentle, steady, almost sacred. Monica was growing taller, her laughter filling the corners of our little home like sunlight spilling through cracked blinds. Michael had become a steady presence in her life, showing up on time, calling when he promised, keeping his words short but kind. There were no more battles, no hidden accusations, no sharp words thrown like knives across a table. Just peace, the kind you only recognize after you've lost it. I often found myself sitting on the porch after putting Monica to bed, thinking about how far we had come. The world used to feel like a battlefield, every breath a negotiation, every smile a disguise. Now it felt like a garden slowly growing back after being burned to ash. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And that's all I ever wanted, for us to live again. One evening, Monica brought me a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "That's you, that's me, and that's Daddy," she said proudly. "We're not fighting anymore. We're a family again, just different." I looked at her artwork, my throat tightening. She had captured what took us years to learn. Family doesn't need to look the same to still be whole. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window as the first light crept across the horizon. My reflection looked different now, not because time had softened my features, but because peace had finally found a home inside me. I thought about the years I spent trying to fix everything, trying to control what was already breaking. I thought about the pain, the screaming, the endless tears. And then I thought about grace, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but teaches you how to live with it. We often believe strength is about fighting back, about never letting anyone see our cracks. But I learned the opposite. Real strength is quiet. It's forgiving when you have every reason not to. It's waking up every morning and choosing love over anger, hope over fear, faith over bitterness. That's what healing truly is. Not forgetting what broke you, but learning to carry it differently. Michael and I began volunteering at a local center for divorced parents, helping others who were walking through the same fire we once did. I remember one woman, tears streaming down her face, saying, "How did you forgive him after everything?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "Because I didn't want my pain to be my daughter's inheritance. That's the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. Holding on to hate doesn't hurt the other person. It poisons you slowly until you can't tell where your wounds end and your identity begins." The world tells us that revenge is satisfying, that justice means making someone pay. But love, real, mature, unbreakable love, teaches the opposite. It whispers that peace isn't something others give you. It's something you build inside yourself, one decision at a time. There were days I still felt the ache of what was lost, the marriage that didn't last, the trust that had to be rebuilt, the nights spent alone wondering what went wrong. But every time those thoughts came, I reminded myself that endings are just disguised beginnings. What broke us made space for something more honest, more grounded, more true. Monica once asked me, "Mommy, do you still love Daddy?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer had changed. "Yes," I said quietly, "but not the kind of love that wants to marry him again. The kind of love that hopes he's okay even when I'm not there." She smiled and said, "That's a nice kind of love." I hugged her and whispered, "It's the kind that sets you free." That's the lesson life gave me, the one I want to pass on to you. Whoever you are reading or listening right now, maybe you're standing in the middle of your own storm, wondering if the pain will ever end. Maybe you're holding on to anger, thinking it's protecting you. Maybe you've lost someone, something, or even yourself along the way. But listen to me. Storms don't last forever. And when they pass, you'll see that you didn't just survive, you changed. You grew roots that no wind can tear up again. Forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. Let go not because it's easy, but because carrying pain will never build the future you deserve. And love. Love even when it feels foolish, even when it hurts, even when you're scared. Because love, when chosen freely, heals everything it touches. When I look back now, I don't see a failed marriage. I see a resurrection. I see two broken people who found a way to stop destroying each other, to rebuild something for the sake of a child who believed love could still win. And maybe that's what faith is, not believing in perfect endings, but trusting that even in the ruins, beauty can grow. To anyone watching this right now, don't let bitterness steal your tomorrow. Don't let fear tell you it's too late to start over. You're stronger than the pain that tried to break you. You're wiser than the mistakes that haunt you. And you're more deserving of peace than you've ever been told. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own battles, if it stirred something inside your heart, then I want you to do one thing. Pause, take a deep breath, and promise yourself you'll keep going. Because somewhere ahead, peace is waiting for you too. And if you believe that love still has the power to heal the deepest wounds, if you believe that grace can find you no matter how lost you are, then join us. Subscribe to this channel, not just for stories, but for reminders that hope is real, that change is possible, and that even in your darkest hour, you are never alone. Let's keep walking together through heartbreak, through healing, through every storm, until we all find that quiet kind of peace that doesn't fade, the one that waits beyond forgiveness. Because in the end, it's not the pain that defines us. It's what we choose to become after it. And my friend, you were always meant to become light.